Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about what I believe to be the single biggest issue with the Vancouver real estate market right now, outside of low housing supply, and that is rent control. Whether you are a landlord, a homeowner, a tenant, a prospective investor right now, rent control is going to affect you. It's starting to rear its ugly head in our market today. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what exactly is happening and what we can expect in the future in terms of impact on real estate. Real quick before we get started, if this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hassan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area, and I make educational real estate content to help you on your real estate journey. I also make content designed to help you make your move in and around Vancouver. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to talk to me one-on-one, you can book me in the top link in the description box, but regardless, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. So to start off this video, I'm going to describe very quickly what rent control is. It's simply the ability for states, provinces, countries to essentially control the amount you're able to raise the rent on a tenant. Now, historically, if we look at rent control and its impacts in different communities across North America, it does a couple things. On the tenant side, it's seemingly a positive thing because the rent is obviously controlled in terms of how much more they're going to pay each year. But the negative side of rent control, we've seen it play out, is how it creates a sort of slumlord environment where when costs are going up, inflation is going up, and you're not able to raise the rent in coordination with that, it promotes a sort of landlord that doesn't take care of fixing up their properties. Anything that's not absolutely mandatory to do, they're generally not doing it because they're having to feed into the property each month after the revenue they collect in rent. They pay out the expenses. They're in the red, so they're actually having to feed into it every month because of rent control. Now, this is easily one of the most controversial topics out there, not just when I'm talking to my clients, my investors, but also speaking with tenants or just the general public in real estate. You will often see news articles about the tenant-landlord relationship, and it's always in favor. It's always in favor of the tenant. It's the big bad landlord, did this and did that, and now, this tenant has to leave because the landlord sold the property. And there's all this negative light that shined on landlords, and this came to my attention most prominently, I would say, in January. In January, I did a video on TikTok, and it was about how landlords are treated differently, or rent control is treated differently in BC and Ontario in newer buildings. And I said that BC landlords get screwed in comparison, and the video blew up. Daily Hive reached out to me for an interview. They did an article on it. Lots of nasty comments in this video. I'll link to it in the description box. But basically, the difference between how BC and Ontario handle this rent control scenario is overall, when it comes to rent increase for this year, 2023, in Ontario, you're able to raise the rent 2.5%. Here in BC, you're able to raise it 2%. Now, on newer buildings that weren't occupied before November 15th, 2018, in Ontario, there is no rent control. So you can, in fact, raise that rent 5, 10%, whatever you need to be able to cover your costs. You can do that. We don't have that opportunity here in BC. In fact, when we look at the historical rent increases here in BC, we used to be tied to the inflation number. So in the past, you used to be able to increase it by the amount of inflation plus 2%. But then the provincial government got rid of that, and they said, okay, just the amount of inflation. And now they're on an entirely new metric since COVID. 2020, you were unable to raise the rent after March. 2021, same story. For last year, you could raise it 1.5%. Now, when you look at where inflation is, where essentially our cost of living, and we have to remember that this same cost of living affects landlords as much as it does tenants. When you look at that figure, running between 5 and 6% inflation, we're not able to raise the rent for the amount of inflation. Now, the big thing that I got from the video I did in the article in Daily Hive is a lot of communication, again, about this big bad landlord scenario. And in fact, a lot of people were pointing fingers at the smaller landlord. Most of my clients, for instance, if they are investors, they own between, say, 1 to 3 properties, the bulk of them. And for a lot of them, landlords are not typically a super wealthy bunch. They're a key cog to the real estate market. And a lot of people are basically looking out for their retirement, or they're trying to help their kids out by purchasing a property today that they can give to their kids in the future. I find that this smaller landlord, what we call a mom and pop landlord, is less likely to raise rents than some of these larger companies, property management companies, essentially, that have multiple buildings, so less likely to raise rents, more likely to maintain their properties in better shape, and really are thoughtful of their tenants a lot more, again, than these larger companies. I've had so many conversations with clients concerned about how's my tenant going to feel when they know that I'm needing to sell my property right now. So there's a lot more care that landlords do have, and they're not painted that way in the media. Whenever you hear any reports, again, it's always so negative. But Vancouver, we have the most amount of mom and pop landlords across the country. About 11% of homeowners report receiving rental income, whether that's from a basement suite or perhaps a condo unit that they have for investment. So keep in mind, if you're watching this video, if you do have a negative thought about landlords in general, not an uber wealthy bunch, and for many of them, they're just trying to secure a small piece for their retirement. Now, here's why rent control is becoming such a big issue in the market. What I'm noticing now as I work with my investors and we're going around looking for properties, rental properties, is investors are no longer interested in the property that has a tenant in it currently. If we look at market rent versus what people are actually paying for rent, in Vancouver, rent is up year over year 18%, meaning that last year you would have rented at around $2,200, whereas today you're renting at $2,600, $2,700. So any lease that was started last year is well below market rent. So what's happening are the investors are not interested in that. They're looking for properties that are vacant. They're looking for properties that are owner occupied, because the owner is going to move out and the investor can capture market rent. So the only people that are looking at these properties that have tenancies that have very, very low rents are end users. And the longer, or I would say the lower your rental rate is today, the more likely it is, unfortunately, that you're going to lose that, because the landlord, the owner, is going to realize that they're not able to raise the rents enough to cover their costs. And at some point, they're going to place that home on the market and an end user is going to purchase it. I'm seeing a couple things play out in this market in regards to that. Number one, a lot of tenants are going to their landlords now and saying, look, if I have the ability to stay, I'm willing to increase my rent in order to do that. Because the alternative is an end user comes in, moves into the property, displaces the tenant. The tenant now may be going from a one bedroom where they're paying $1,400 because they've been there for 10 years to now having to pay $2,500 or $2,600, but also find a new place. So again, a lot of tenants out there, they don't want the stress of finding a new place, so they're going to the landlord saying, look, I'm willing to do this. The second thing that people talk about is, okay, well, when this happens, when an end user purchases this unit, it's usually a tenant that's moving into that property. So it's essentially tenants displacing other tenants. Now that is often the case, but sometimes that purchaser is just moving out of the family home, or they may even be a downsizer as well. So in my last video, I did talk about how I expect to see more of these investor-held properties to hit the market this year as well as into next year. And now with interest rates stabilizing, it's seemingly a positive thing that they are stable, and of course it is. But again, we're left in some scenarios now where a lot of these rental investors that have had properties for some time, they're collecting less than market rents. And so now they're thinking, okay, well, rather than continue to feed this property, might make sense to put it on the market. I'm finding that a lot of home buyers, and when I'm working with my own home buyers that aren't investors, we are targeting these properties that have tenants in them, because they're often a little bit more difficult to show. Again, we're not competing with the investors. So in essence, we are moving home buyers, end users into these properties. And again, that tenant, unfortunately, is getting displaced. So in terms of a solution to this rent control crisis, which I would say is a sub-crisis to the housing market itself, the provincial government is responsible for deciding how much we're able to raise rents, what percentage that might be. Very curious to see what we're going to be allowed to raise rents for next year. I'm not a proponent just because rental prices went up 18%. I'm not saying that we should be raising it to that effect or to that level. I'm definitely not saying that. I think there has to be a happy medium. I think everyone needs to be protected, but the message through this video is that rent control does not only hurt the landlord or the homeowner, it is hurting the tenant now. I first caught wind of this within the last, I'd say 4 to 6 weeks. I was noticing it working with my own clients. This happening in the last week. I've had a couple agents reach out to me saying, how does this process work? We've had a tenant come to the landlord and say, I want to pay more, I want to stay here. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this happening. There needs to be a happy medium by the provincial government. I think they're doing a lot of good things when it comes to the housing market, but rent control, I don't think it's quite on their radar in terms of the impact this is going to have on the market. I definitely think it's going to be a major story within the next 6 months, and I'm going to follow this story, of course, on this channel, so make sure you keep watching to future videos. So there you have it, guys. That's what's going on when it comes to rent control and tenant-landlord scenario in today's real estate market. If you learned something in this video, hit the like button, because what that does is it sends this video out to more people so they can learn from it as well. And subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. Again, if you want to talk about your own real estate situation with me one-on-one, happy to do that. You can book me in the Calendly link below, or you can send me a text, give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever's easier for you. But I want to thank you so much for watching this video. Stay tuned for next week's video, and I hope you have a wonderful week.